It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hey friends, this is Andy. This episode of Accelerate is brought to you by Kitedesk. Kitedesk is the all-in-one sales development platform that lets you manage all of your sales development activities, such as email, direct dial phone calls, and your daily to-dos, all in one place to open up conversations, book more qualified meetings, and really create a predictable pipeline.
Kitedesk Flow and Kitedesk Find allows us to find exactly the right people in the industries we're looking for, in the roles that we're looking for.
That's Kitedesk customer Michael Orphis. Michael is head of sales at Stratified. In addition to the all-in-one management of his sales development team's days, Kitedesk helps him with another big part of his job.
We have the ability with Kitedesk to do what we call targeted campaigns. Our conversion rate from what we were doing in the past to what we're doing now has been really massive.
So you don't have to take tons of time to research, prospect, then blast large lists of people that never turn into sales opportunities.
We're seeing higher clicks, we're seeing higher open rates, and without question, we've seen a massive increase in pipeline generation.
So, to learn more about Kitedesk, schedule a free demo, and learn how to create predictable pipeline at your sales organization, go to kitedesk.com/accelerate. That's KITEDESK.com/accelerate. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm looking forward to talking to my guest today. Joining me on his show is Ed Wallace. He's the founder and CEO of the Relational Capital Group and the author of a couple great books, which we're going to talk about today. Ed, welcome to Accelerate.
Hi, Andy. Great to be with you and your audience.
Well, nice to have you. So take a minute, introduce yourself. I mean, that was a fairly short introduction I gave. I always leave it to the guest to introduce. They do a better job of introducing themselves.
Well, Andy, I appreciate that. And I guess the best way to introduce myself is I'm a CPA by education. I always like to say I'm in recovery. My accounting friends tend to get a kick out of that. And
in recovery from sales by the same time.
Exactly. And part of that recovery process is to go into sales. So I spent about 20 years with a tech company as a senior executive on the sales and marketing side. The company went from $1 million to $120 million during the time I was there, so everybody did very well.
So which company is that?
Vertex. They're a tax technology business centered in Pennsylvania, but they are global now.
Got it.
I was the 9th employee. They wound up with 1,000 and counting, so it's quite a story.
Nice.
At one point, though, I decided that I wanted to strike out on my own, and I really wanted to write books and talk with people like you, like I'm doing today. So wrote a couple of early books. It got us some cachet, and then about 5 years ago, came out with a book that you mentioned when we were prepping a little bit called Business Relationships That Last. That really created a space for us in the sales world as a thought leader there and a sales trainer about how to build great business relationships in the sales arena. When it came to moving that into the leadership arena, our mutual publisher, Amacom, said, hey, these concepts apply equally to the leadership world. Why don't you do a book with us on relational leadership? And the book is The Relationship Engine because they don't like to put leadership on too many books anymore because everybody has leadership on their cover. So I like the way they did it. I think they did a great job with it. We were talking earlier, everybody's in sales, Andy, no matter how you look at it. If you're external, you're certainly building relationships with clients and customers and centers of influence. If you're internal, you've got to get some unbudgeted money for a project, or you've got to put a team together and get resources that are at will, and they're not available at that point in time. So how do we help people buy and not have to sell to them all the time? And the concepts in my books are really about how do we facilitate people buying our ideas, buying our products and services. And this is our 10th year, so we're doing pretty well at the Relational Capital Group. We've evolved to working mostly with Fortune 2000 companies now, and it's been very, very rewarding.
Excellent. Okay, let's talk about one of the sort of core concepts you have, which is the concept of relational capital. That's the title of your company. So explain what relational capital is, because I think people need to understand that before we proceed into the deeper discussion.
Sure. Well, relational capital was defined by academics years ago as kind of like the value of intangible assets on a balance sheet, or the relationships between companies at that level. I defined it at a human level, one-to-one, and I call it the distinctive value created by people in a business relationship. And in every business relationship you have, there are three qualities that can come into play. The first one's credibility. A lot of the stuff you write about, Andy, is all about developing credibility. I wanted to make sure I commented on that. And if you look at credibility and you look at the definition, a lot of people will say, well, that's keeping your promises. That's doing what you say you're going to do. It's really not. That's integrity. Credibility is the power to elicit belief. And I was shocked by that definition. Andy, you were going to comment there. I'm sorry.
No, I said that. I agree. There's a big difference between integrity and credibility.
There really is. And I don't believe that a business relationship can go anywhere until we are deemed believable. But once we're deemed believable and we're credible, now it becomes a mutual relationship, bringing in the second quality, which is integrity. So when those two qualities combine, now you're doing stuff together, for lack of a better phrase. And the sooner we can be authentic in that process, that's the third quality. That's when relational or relationship capital comes into play. And if you think about it, the more believable we are, the more we keep our promises, and the truer we are to ourselves. I always like to say, be yourself, everybody else is taken. The better chance we have to build this relational capital, the better chance we have to advance the relationship and get some stuff done together.
Well, that be yourself seems to be a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why is that the case? I mean, because it's, and you certainly see this in the sales world, especially with the migration to, given the benefit of technology, to be sales more virtual these days. Also tends to be a little bit more scripted, and the authenticity that I think needs to be there for those one-to-one relationships is harder and harder to come by.
And I think we tend to, and believe me, I love technology, but I tend to think we lean on that thinking, let's go to LinkedIn, for instance. If we're going to talk about technology and relationships, that might be my best example here. When you think about it, I was giving a speech recently, and somebody brought up, well, I have all these LinkedIn connections. I have thousands of connections. I said, fantastic. Where's that getting you? And he said, it's not really helping me very much.
Yeah, where are the relationships?
Right, and what we tend to when I say we, I'm being I'm overgeneralizing there. But what I find when I'm working with our customers and our clients, we tend to want to accumulate or aggregate ethereal relationships, and that somehow is like a badge. It makes us feel good. But when you're trying to accomplish something, when you're trying to complete a project, when you're trying to close a sale, it really gets down to a one-to-one relationship with someone. So we talk about creating an action plan, believe it or not, for other human beings who come into our goals. So, we'll ask you, what are your goals for the year? Give us 2 or 3. Now attach a human being or human beings to each goal. And now let's create a plan for that relationship. And it's that simple. And would you believe that, the latest research that we've uncovered about relationships is that 45% relationships, the best relationships. So think about your best business relationship, Andy. It's really only working at 45% of its potential if you fall within the average of everybody else. Mm-hmm. So there's so much room there. And relationships are difficult. They're awkward. They take time. Everybody's like, well, I'm not sure the return on investment yet. But the same survey says 90% of executives believe it's the secret to their success and their team's success. They just don't think about it in terms of process. They don't think about it in terms of what I call intentionality in the book.
Right, which we're going to get into. But before we get there, so how do you measure the potential of a relationship?
How do you measure the potential or measure the strength?
Well, you're saying the 45%. We're only using 45%, exercising 45% of the potential of the relationship.
Well, think about it. Let's just use an example. I can use an example from our own business. We've got a lot of customers, and we tend to sell them a program, and we tend to satisfy their needs, and we get great evaluations and all that stuff. and I have a sales team, and I have the kind of relationship where I could easily get on the phone with that client and say, hey, you know what? Can you give us some references? I never do, and my salespeople never do. Now, your best customers are your best referral source. So that's a great example. That's a personal example that we live this stuff every day in our business. For 10 years, all we've done is think about relationships. We've done all this research. We've created metrics. But at the end of the day, we tend to fall into the same category where we just say, you know what, let's go get a new customer. Well, that's an old customer. Let's just get a new one. When the old customer is the best customer, the highest margin, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I hope that's a good example for you.
Sure. No, it's a very common one, right? We put so much emphasis on new customers as opposed to, let's expand this relationship. Okay, so your first book, you had sort of 5 steps that transform contacts into high-performing relationships. You were talking about establishing common ground, displaying integrity and trust, so on and so forth. And it seems like in the new book, the Relationship Engine, as you said, you're sort of expanding those and turning the focus a little bit onto leadership.
Exactly. Well, in the first book, you're moving up a ladder. We call it the relational ladder, the process. And you tend to want to take your customers or your prospects from acquaintances to peers or to advisor level type relationships. You want to move up the ladder. The nuance between that, and we point this out in the book, the nuance between that and the process for leadership, relational leader relationships, is that the relational leader, in intentionally thinking about relationships, can decide, I don't need to move this person to the highest level because based on the goal we're working on, we can just stay colleagues. So the process in the relationship engine, which is all about how to become a relational leader, has 3 dimensions of relationships laid out in there. They're colleagues, they're professional peers, which is a similar dimension to the previous process, and they're advocates. And let's say let me give you an example of each one. Let's say you and I are we're transitioning team leadership on a project within our company, and I got to get to know you, and we're going to spend a couple of months together, and that's probably the last time we'll work together, maybe for a while. Well, we don't probably need more than a colleague level relationship at that point. We don't have time. Time's our most non-renewable resource. So in the relational agility process, which is the relational leader's approach to launching, advancing, and elevating relationships, the leader makes a decision based on this goal, transitioning team leadership, not a great big goal. I just need to be a colleague with Andy. Now let's say in another example, you and I have worked together before. We're colleagues. We worked together on this project a few years ago that we transitioned team leadership, and now we've got to integrate a new product line from a joint venture. In this case, we got to be peers. We got to have a higher level relationship. So again, when I start thinking about the goal and the deliverable, I need a peer level relationship with Andy Paul, not a colleague level relationship. And then finally, now a couple years later, we've been great peers. We've been working together for a while. You're now on the board of our company, and I need $1 million unbudgeted. Where am I going to go first? I'm going to try to create a relationship where we're advocates. So relational leaders don't have to go to advocate like salespeople need to get to the top of the ladder. They consciously decide, this is where I need to be. I hope that helps.
Well, even think about that, though, in a sales context. I mean, if you look at the way things are sort of seem to be shaping up in a large, complex enterprise sale, like the challenger customer, they talk about the number of stakeholders that exist, and that number is increasing. I mean, it's 5, 6, 7 people that you have to sell to.
Yep.
But in addition to those people, I mean, there's also other people you have to talk to that almost sort of fit, almost all of those descriptions that you had. I mean, some are going to be advocates, some are going to be peers, and some are going to be colleagues that maybe just point you to somebody else, and don't really have a role beyond that.
I completely agree. And again, the relational leader, and the relational leader could be an account manager in sales. It could be a high-tech sales, senior sales executive. It could be a director level in human resources for a corporation. Relational leader can be the receptionist, because everybody can get better at their business relationships. I've rarely asked a prospect of ours or a customer, do you believe, I'll ask this question, I rarely hear no. And the question is, do you believe there's a strong connection to your team's performance and the strength of their relationships? We rarely hear no. And then I'll say, what are you doing about that? Well, we just hire great people. And those great people have to then go figure it all out on their own. And we try to give them some vitamins. We try to give them some prompts. We share a process on how to build either customer relationships in the first book or internal colleague type relationships in the relationship engine. And again, when you're working in a complex sales situation, back to your scenario, there are subject matter experts around your company who you need your help from, and I call them at will. Because unless they're specifically assigned to your project at that moment in time, you're not part of their plans, Andy. And here comes Andy looking for some subject matter expertise. So the internal relationships you build are probably just as important as the external ones you're trying to build with the influencers and everyone you reference on the buying team. And back to the research, the weakest relationships, believe it or not, are internal relationships.
Yeah, well, I think they suffer from the same thing all relationships are, that people take them for granted.
Complacency, yep. Yes, very good.
So, all right. So, we talk about relational leadership, as I spit that out. So you define that in the book as someone who intentionally puts the other person's goals and values at the forefront of each business relationship. So, I mean, to me, that's a recipe for a sales rep or account executive or account manager, as well as working their internal relationships. I mean, it's really sort of, you're talking about sort of a give to get. I mean, which is sort of, one of the cliches that, I won't say cliches, but aphorisms, I guess, that we all live by these days.
Absolutely. And the other half of that, Andy, is not, so we're not suggesting, and I really try to call this out a few times in the relationship engine, we're not suggesting that get good intentions towards your colleagues and your customers. We're assuming you have those. The challenge is, the other part of relational leadership is, are you observing behaviors coming back to you that validate for you that they believe that? Because that's when worthy intent, which is the number one principle in the book, that's when it manifests. So we can have all the good intentions we want about things, Andy, but if the people we're working with in a one-on-one capacity or as part of a team don't recognize that we're really working for the greater good and they're not behaving in a way that validates that for us. So for instance, a great example would be, you're working with someone and they start sharing confidences with you. They give you extra meeting time that was unscheduled. Mm-hmm. They give you an early heads up on things. One of the things I can offer to your audience when we're finished is they can go out and take a free RQ assessment. And we built
RQ standing for
relational intelligence or relational quotient.
Okay. All right.
We actually have an objective measure that was developed by Villanova University's Human Resources Masters Department. And they came up with 35 behaviors that human beings exhibit in business. And we've refined those over the years, but they pretty much stood the test of time. And their behaviors like, Andy does not respond to my email correspondence. Andy calls me back. Andy gives me extra meeting time. Andy introduces me to people, et cetera, et cetera. So what relational leaders are great at is going in with good intentions and then validating those intentions through the behaviors they see coming back. And RQ is an assessment. It's an online assessment that allows that relational leader to go out and answer some questions about some people and get a report back that says, hey, you know what? You're a professional peer. Here's some ideas to keep that relationship going. Or if you want to advance it, here's some ideas around that. So there's an objective measure, it's an RQ score, and of course, subjectively, we can just look at behaviors individually and say, you know what, I think I have a pretty good relationship here with Andy.
Well, I think one of the key things you brought up here, and I think the RQ is really interesting, is though you talked about if you're not getting validating behaviors coming back from the other party. So you think about this from a sales perspective. And it really boils down to the three things you talked about up front: the credibility, integrity, and authenticity.
Excellent.
Is that if you're not getting the response you want from people you're trying to form a relationship with, that's the core reason, right? These three things is, A, they don't trust you, they don't believe you, and that oftentimes leads to reasons of authenticity. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I tend to think that if you're not getting the response you want and it's a newer relationship, you're just not believable yet, Andy. You're just not credible yet. But if the relationship's been going on for a while and now you're not getting the response, and I think integrity probably popped in there somewhere, an integrity issue. And some research on integrity and trust is that Great Places to Work Institute did a survey a while back, and they said they studied business interactions. So this is a business interaction we're having today, right? Mm-hmm. And when we get off and you play this down the road, your audience will either trust you more or they'll trust you less, believe it or not. Their perception of me, the trust will either be higher or lower. And what the study said was that it's really important for us to focus on every single interaction we have, whether it be electronic or audio like this or any way we're doing it, because there's a good chance when the parties leave the interaction, trust will either increase or decrease. It's rarely neutral. So you're very insightful going back to those qualities. There's something missing if the relationship's not getting off the ground, or if it slides. A good example,
which is a great thing. I'm sorry to insert, but is and I talk about this in my books. Is that every time you have an interaction with somebody, and let's take a prospect for instance, they are judging you. To your point about trust either increases or decreases. There is no such thing as a neutral interaction with somebody.
Well, and as in reviewing a lot of things you write about, credibility and integrity are huge in the stuff you write about.
Yeah,
they're huge in there.
Well, an interesting point though you make is, you lead with credibility and sort of follow with trust, and then you have like Amy Cuddy with her book Presence, where she almost sort of inverts that. She thinks people start with trust and then go to competence afterwards. Does it matter?
Well, it's interesting. I think I'm a big, Stephen M. R. Covey endorsed my latest book, and he's the king of trust, right?
Oh yeah, Speed of Trust. Love the book.
Exactly, and he knows that I lead with credibility. And we talk about that, and I'll say, until you're deemed believable, you don't get the opportunity for them to trust you and for you to display integrity and trust. So I look at it kind of linear. If I ask an audience this question, let's use a sales example. People buy from people they. Invariably, Andy, the first response is like, and trust comes second.
No like and trust, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, no usually comes third. So again, I find it interesting that in any kind of audience, when I ask that, generally like comes first. And I'll ask the audience, why did most of you say like? And they'll say it's a superset. I'm like, what do you mean? What's a superset? They go, well, it's a superset of I'm auditioning the person. I'm assessing them emotionally. Like usually comes through first before trust comes through. In the book, we talk about warmth and competence, and I think I cite in one of our white papers Amy Cuddy, and she's really big on warmth before competence, and warmth. Right. Warmth generally comes from the way we approach people. Now, we can approach people in a way that makes them trust us. So that's probably why she works in that down that avenue. But the other thing she writes about, which I think is pretty compelling, is that from the time we were primitive, whenever that was, whatever we believe, at one point we were less advanced than we are today. I think everybody can kind of accept that, right?
We may be going back the other way, but just
that's another conversation, right? But from the time we were primitive, if you approached me with a club, and I was in the forest with my family. The first thing that went through my mind, and in her research and Dr. Fisk's research, this has been proven out, is I'm not as worried about Andy's competence with the club as I'm worried about, right, exactly, as I'm worried about what his intentions are.
Right.
Exactly. So believe it or not, their research, which is so compelling, after all these centuries, thousands of years of evolution or whatever we believe in, again, you got to be careful, that when a sales rep or a business leader or a relational leader walks into someone's office, they're assessing us and they're trying to figure out our intentions for walking in their door. It's still baked into us. So again, I'm not debating trust before credibility or whatever. I think the whole thing does get down to warmth, which is what she promotes.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think you're right. I think they're really sort of linear. I don't necessarily know that one completely precedes one or the other, but
right.
They both need to be there. And I agree with the authenticity being part of that as well.
Exactly.
So yeah, you have this concept you talk about, displaying worthy intent, which you say is this promise you make to put the other person's best interests at the forefront of what you're doing, at the forefront of the relationship. Seems self-evident. That's talked about in sales ad nauseum. That you got to be customer-oriented, customer first, be present. Yet it's a hard behavior for people to learn. And so how do you learn that behavior, right? How do you make this a habit?
Well,
that's what I want people to focus on, right? How do I make integrate this into what I do and make this a habit, displaying this worthy intent?
Well, I finished that particular chapter in the book with trust is the inevitable consequence of worthy intent. And I'm kind of proud of that line. I don't know how I invented that line, because an inevitable consequence and trust seems like they're negatives, right? But ultimately, when we go into interactions, the fastest way, I believe, to start getting to credibility is asking questions that are very relevant and very topical to the person you're talking with. Not, I see you like golf. That's probably not, like when we started talking before this recording, Andy, you asked me some really great questions. I felt this is a warm guy. He's got his good intentions towards me to try to help him with this podcast today. It was very comfortable. And how do we create that kind of experience for the people we're working with? And it gets down to, we certainly go in with good intentions, but the way we conduct that interaction is important. And we have a concept called relational GPS.
Which I love, by the way. I think it's a great mnemonic for people to remember, especially salespeople, because it directly applies to customers.
It cuts through, and again, this concept's been adopted by customers of ours around the world now because it's so darn simple. In general, everybody you work with has business and personal goals.
That's the G.
Causes or passions, that's the P, things they care deeply about, and or struggles. And I've never run into anybody who doesn't have struggles in life.
Goals, passion, struggles, GPS,
Goals,
right?
GPS. And I call it the universal framework for every business relationship because it can cross generations. A boomer can talk to a millennial and learn GPS and have a better chance to have a relationship with that person than they can just kind of ad-libbing it. So relational leaders, by being intentional initially with the first principle, which is worthy intent, how do I do that? Of course, I have good intentions towards Andy. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to try to learn some of Andy's GPS in this. I'm not going to say, "Hey, Andy, what are your goals, passions, and struggles?" Right? And it's really funny because we'll work with young salespeople sometimes, and they'll email me and say, "Hey, I'm going to a first meeting. I'm going to ask Andy about his GPS." I'm like, I don't know if you want to phrase it quite that way. But I learned several things about you as you were asking me questions earlier. And the simple way to do it is, as you're taking notes when you're in that conversation, write the acronym vertically, GPS, on a piece of paper and start jotting down, oh my gosh, Andy shared a goal with me. I guess I'm becoming credible. And we love it when our customers are able to learn goals from their customers or their colleagues, but we don't give as many points for that, Andy, as when Andy shares a struggle with me. Right. Because that's when Andy's saying, this guy's provoking some thought on my part. I like the way he's handling this conversation. I'm not afraid to let him go around the company and it'll make me look better than maybe someone else that I might send around. So we give a lot of points for struggles. And ultimately, if you can get to passions, which that's a longer term thing when they start sharing their charities or things about their family or maybe their career is their passion, then you've really locked up a great chance, or what I call you've competitor-proofed yourself, because almost anything they share, except maybe their political opinion, let's say, or their opinion about something else, falls into one of those three categories. So it simplifies things because there's so much information that salespeople, leaders are trying to figure out and process today. The universal framework, relational GPS, 3 simple letters, write a note down next to each one, and bring that up or use that for research in time for the next interaction. You do more of that. And again, in the relationship engine, in the relational agility process in there, that's how colleagues launch their relationships and start displaying worthy intent. Long answer to your original question.
Well, but it's also how, for people in the audience, it's also how people in sales build a relationship with a prospect and with a customer.
Oh, yes.
Because the customer is not, if you, as Ed said, if you write down on one side of your piece of paper or however you're taking notes on your iPad, is goals, passion, struggles. Those translate into a business sense, right? Yes. Customers have goals. They have things that they're, passionate about achieving within their business that maybe is not in the prime focus of what needs to be accomplished. But if they could accomplish that as well, that would be fantastic. And obviously struggles, pain points and so on they're trying to address. Is you're not going to get those answers though without trust and credibility being there first, right? This is what people in sales have a hard time understanding first, is that a customer is just not going to tell you everything just because you're there, right? Just because they've agreed to meet with you, it doesn't mean they're going to open up and tell you. And my good friend Mark Hunter, who's also another Amicom author, talks about, he knows that he's on the right track with a customer when they do share something in confidence, right? Something they're not telling, that to him, that's the key. That, wow, that's the first step to being a qualified prospect for me, because I've gone across that chasm there, and they've entrusted something confidential to me.
Think about it. I know that a lot of your audience works with business owners. Think about it. If you can get a business owner, if you can ask him the questions in the right way to, we call them learnabouts, by the way. We don't call them questions. If you can come up with the right learnabouts that create credibility for you with that business owner, they're going to get to passions about their business a lot faster than maybe a vice president of a corporation that you're trying to have, work with to buy something from you. The business owners are very passionate about their business, and they like talking about their business. I love talking about my business. You love talking about your business. And when someone who is a vendor who's trying to create a relationship with us, when they ask the kind of questions that get us talking in that direction, all the more powerful. You want an anecdote? You want a $10 million anecdote on GPS?
Sure, give us a $10 million. We'll conclude with that.
Okay.
We'll conclude this first segment of the show with that.
Okay. So I was working with a customer a few years ago, a large company, multi-billion-dollar company, and we were working with their account managers. And part of the process was for them to learn the GPS of their customers. So we conducted some instructor-led training. We did some coaching, and we bring everybody back in 3 months, and we have them profess what they did, actual work, how they apply these concepts. So when we got to the follow-up workshop, the VP of sales got up and he says, I want Nick to tell his GPS story. So I didn't even have to facilitate anything. And this guy, Nick, got up in front of the room. And by the way, in the workshop, Nick was not very active. but apparently he paid a lot of attention. And they were about to lose a $4 million account because of the degradation of the relationships between sales leadership and any account manager they put on this particular account. This vice president wanted nothing to do with this account. And it was a very difficult account to fire, by the way, but they were going to fire them. $4 million a year. So this VP of sales said, he had nothing to lose. He'll put this young guy, Nick, on it. And Nick goes in and he just starts applying this idea of learning about this person who was about to fire them. After those 3 months, what Nick learned was that this person was concerned that there's going to be a merger and he was going to lose his job and not become COO. And that Nick's company was making him look bad in that process. Once Nick learned that and the fellow opened up to him, things started getting resolved. And I think it was 4 months. After 4 months, Nick saved the $4 million. And the VP of sales got up and he announced that we're going to get another $6 million from this guy's, the customer's customers who he's requiring to use our services. It was a data storage company. So they were going to lose 4. They wound up taking it to 10, and Nick stood up and he said, I just went in and started trying to learn about him, and I started applying this GPS concept. So there's a real life anecdote where if you keep it simple, you learn some things about the person, they start opening up to you. Now you know how to solve some of their problems. And the funny part of the story is the customer still didn't like the vice president. So when this all got resolved and the business escalated again, he left the vice president this message, and I'll never forget this quote. John, this is so and so from whatever company, I can't name them. We just re-upped your contract, and I'm making everybody else use your stuff too. So there, and he slammed the phone down.
Yeah. I like is a relative term in this, but the point about Nick is back to your story is clearly he had credibility, right? In order to be able to have the person open up. And this is the thing that I keep stressing on the show and in my writings for, the audience that are listening is, credibility comes from, in part, knowledge, right? To be able to elicit belief, people have to understand and believe that something about their struggles, something about what they're trying to achieve, and it requires a certain specialization, right? A certain knowledge set. And so, everything I talk about in terms of why I believe is, the era of the specialist in selling is really coming into being is supported by what you're talking about here is it's an easier path to credibility. Certainly, enhances, if you have integrity to go along with it, that enhances it. And, the customers know if you know what you're talking about. That's, if you are being yourself and being authentic, they know that.
And when you talk about absolute responsiveness, and I believe that it starts with those, and it's not once they're customers. It starts with the way you conducted that first interaction.
Exactly.
And how you prepared for that. That shows you're going to be responsive. You came in and asked the kind of questions they haven't probably been asked before. And all of a sudden, their emotional assessment of you is changing. I forget what the exact statistics are, but 75% or so, according to the Wharton School of Buying Decisions, are emotional. When everybody keeps telling us they're rational, but they're not. They're assessing your tie, the gel in your hair. In my case, the way you ask and whether you were prepared or not. And you mentioned authenticity earlier, and I wanted to get back to that. And your comment here a minute ago just teed that up. I think in the case that I shared, Nick was very authentic with this VP. I think he went in, he's a young guy. He didn't go in indicating he knew everything because he did it. I think he was really authentic about that. And I think somehow this person looked at it and connected like, you know what, I've been really hard on this company, on this vendor, but why would I be hard on this kid? And
exactly.
all of a sudden, 0 went to 10 million, and that's a real number.
That's a real number, right?
That's a real number.
Ed, we've come to the last segment of my show where I ask some standard questions of all my guests, and the first one is a hypothetical scenario where in the scenario you, Ed, have just been hired as VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. And they want to hit the reset button and get things on track. And the CEO is very anxious for this to happen. So what 2 things could you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
The first thing I would do is I would reach out to my team and try to launch or establish some type of relationship with them. Because sales stalling, I'm not humanly going to be able to do that all by myself. Mm-hmm. So I would reach out internally, get my key team members, and talk to them, find out what's going on. The next thing I would do is go reach out to my customers and find out why they stayed with us, even though sales are stalling. What is it about our process? What is it about our sales approach? And one of my great friends, Tom Feeney, the CEO of Safelite Autoglass, who he's in our book. He's a true relational leader. He's always been an advocate of ours. He still goes on sales calls from time to time. Now, this is the CEO of a $1 billion plus company because he loves the interaction. And one of his questions when he gets together with a prospective customer, not necessarily a customer, but let's face it, there's probably a ton of prospective customers in the scenario that you're talking about. He'll say to them, what are the top 2 or 3 criteria you look for in a vendor? And it seems like a very simple question, but when we put our customer, our prospect, in the role of an expert, they're going to share with us reasons they buy from other people, and that'll help us understand why they might or might not be buying from us. And I find that interesting. So I think you need to assess, intentionally where are you relationally with your own team, and then where is your team, or where are we relationally with our customers, and then that also transitions over to our prospects. But I would not worry about metrics. I would not worry about sales training. I would not worry about anything other than where do we stand relationally with those 2 main constituencies.
All right, excellent answer. So now some rapid fire questions. You can give me 1-word answers or elaborate a little bit if you wish. So the first one is, when you, Ed Wallace, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
Listening.
Who's your sales role model?
Max the taxi cab driver in my previous book.
Okay. You and Scott McCain have taxi cab drivers, I think, as sales role models. What's the one book, besides your own, one book every salesperson should read?
Everything I ever needed to know I learned in kindergarten. It's about 12 pages.
All right. Excellent. All right. So last question. What music's on your playlist these days?
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to have to give this up to you now, Andy, but I am a closet Rolling Stones nut. So everything I play is vintage Rolling Stones. I've been to 4 or 5 concerts, and it's just amazing to me. I can stand up and do a keynote talk, and I am exhausted after 1 hour. And I watch these, and all rock guys in their 70s, and they're out there 4 nights in a row for 3 or 4 hours. Yep. So I'd say the Rolling Stones, they would be my group, and always been a Beatles fan too.
Excellent. All right. Well, good. Well, Ed, thank you very much for joining me today. Tell people how they can connect with you.
Oh, thanks. You can reach me at Ed Wallace at relcapgroup.com, relcapgroup.com, relationalcapitalgroup.com. And I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to take what we call an RQ assessment, you can go to our website, relationalcapitalgroup.com. Click a couple of buttons and we will send you an access code, and you can take a free assessment. A salesman will not call, so don't worry about that. And you'll find out all about how strong your top 5 relationships are. Excellent. Well, good. Well, again, thanks for joining me. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to take a minute and subscribe to this podcast, Accelerate, because that way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Ed Wallace, who shared his expertise of how to accelerate the growth of your business and your relationships. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show.
If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.